Welcome to the Green Ring, and thanks for watching this note-by-note dissection of Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen. This video is 9th in a series of 16 devoted to Die Walküre Act 1. Built on nearly 2 centuries of scholarly literature, it's a massive journey I hope you'll take with me, one I'm dedicated to finishing. For an explanation of who I am, and more on the reasons for this series, please check the preface video. First in a group of 6 building a foundation to this in-depth analysis. Before diving into this video, you may want to watch The Case for Erda, The Case Against Photon, and The Case for Loge, which present my views on how and why Wagner manipulates his musical syntax as he does, in the process identifying key morphemes which I believe define the entire work. You'll find explanations for why the terms leitmotif, motif, and motive have been replaced by morpheme, module, and cell in the chapter titled Music as Text. Links are provided in the comments below. My aim is to mount subsequent videos each week, with breaks of approximately a month between each drama's acts until the entire ring is analyzed. We pick up where we left off, Hunding reacting to Siegmund's narrative, page 55 in Dover's Full Score, second stave. Act 1's first section builds intense sympathy for Siegmund and Sieglinde, while also carefully leaving dark their full backstory. In using the twins' real names, this commentary betrays a weakness all ring analysts share, who already know what, at this point halfway through the act, remains hidden to first-timers. As previously discussed, syntactic conceptual threads link the tale to Rheingold, but guardedly. Only the hushed trombone Valhalla Part 1 fanfare as Siegmund loses his father, connecting the Wälsung directly to Rheingold. Along with the powerful compassion Siegmund and Sieglinde have only just excited, this sophisticated device sets viewers aching to know what these 3 mortals, thrown together seemingly by chance, have to do with Albrecht's cursed ring. The act's next order of business is to answer only so much of that riddle as leaves intact the tension already established, while further heightening it. The Meister accordingly ratchets up the pressure another notch. The last note of Siegmund's revelation initiates ottavo string's harsh marcato scale, its spear-opposing ascent reminiscent of Mime and Albrecht's Rheingold defiance. Diving from it on a prescient Erda 7th, the Vala's hand, low strings rise on first inversion heroic melody notes, the Niding's flavor of barbaric nobility. Studiously guarded until now, he shows his hand at last, barking out his hatred for Siegmund's race in 3 a cappella phrases, which make it clear he's long been familiar with these so-called Wölfings. His peroration begins with a low ash interval on an Erda 4th, leading into his syntactic acknowledgement of the Wälsung race, a triple echo of Siegmund's extended reverse melody notes, prominent in the hero's forlorn lament. After a quaver rest, Hunding's second phrase alters the first, this time rising a 6th without ash interval, its extended spear-like descent capped with his own bold anti-barrier. A single low string pulse, the prelude's threatening double impact, punctuates the whole, that cell prominent in his own syntax. His next phrase embellishes the first 2, rising a 4th to fall in hyper-extended reverse melody notes through an initial triplet, this time concluded by a hard syncopated turn, though here, after a quaver rest to emphasize the Niding's contempt, rounded in a sinister descending 5th. Octavo low strings answer by thumping out his morpheme rhythm, viola substituting its rising scalar twitch for a turn not unlike that with which Loge twits Albrecht in Rheingold, scene 4, its mark of irritation to acquire particular import during Act 2. Low strings boost the rhythm's final giant thump, a minor second, and after a crotchet-dotted quaver rest, Hunding reveals he's just come from mopping up after Siegmund's assault on his fellow clansmen. Bouncing up-down fifths, this mockery of the Wälsung bounce preface to his triplet melody notes, whose falling third cap makes it a chagrin pulse. Low strings demi-semiquaver scale races down into another monotone Hunding pulse, beneath a diminished minor bassoon triad, answered on the measure's third beat as violas slide up resentment into a menacing octaval horn semibreve at the tritone. It fades with the rhythm's final giant thump, as Hunding intones an emphatic crotchet tied to a static quaver triplet from which he plunges a sixth into 3 static notes, lifts a third, then repeats his 6th dive, this time phrased as a reverse ash interval, all framing that ugly tritone discord. Octaval low strings rise from his last note on reverse chord notes to themselves sink a third, a sort of fate inversion establishing a breve-semibreve pedal. Over it, after a crotchet-dotted quaver rest, he continues his reveal, descending on racially accusative reverse melody notes, then, after a quaver pause, lifting a third into the melody notes themselves, their low ash interval defeating that subtly ambiguous variant of the giant turn, with its slowly developing implications of the Titan's racial aspirations set against photons. Hunding follows his crotchet quaver rest by rising on melody notes, parsed through a pair of low ash intervals, his swelling triumph at finding the criminal in his own home. Strings join bassoon's dotted semibreve diminished minor chord as, after a crotchet rest, the knighting lord finishes his thought by lifting a third into the Wälsung's reverse melody notes, parsed on a reverse ash interval, and concluded by another reverse on a decisive fourth. He takes stage in silence atop fourth horn's menacing pedal swell, his earlier impatience with Sieglinde returned, timpani launching each of its 2 iterations with Valhalla ash intervals. After a third and final timpani Valhalla ash stroke, the orchestra falls silent, as Hunding decrees his honor shelters this renegade for the night. His first a cappella phrase leaps up a fourth into another extended reverse melody note line whose quaver rest jeers Siegmund's distress, though capped with a falling third which, after another quaver rest, he finishes on a second third descent to mock that Welterb triad now associated with the Wälsung race. Topped by a minor 6th lift, he also produces a sneering pulse of that once joyful Rhine Maiden module, as beneath noble major mode semibreve bassoon horn chords, octavo low strings tap out a single monotone Hunding strophe. His next phrase repeats 3 static notes, then sinks through reverse melody notes, finished in reverse chord notes, the partial giant turn from Siegmund's hunting syntax. The final bassoon horn chord fades on a downbeat crotchet as, in a strategically dramatic return, progressively investing the passage with ugly threat, tubas launch a brief development of Hunding's personal morphine, built from 1 pulse of the complete module, followed by 3 of its 4th bounce giant thump cells, then 2 thumps. This ever more harmonically intense evolution swells through a dire memory of Albrecht's curse, the Furcht, promise there made real in this knighting lord. Cello resentment scales here triplets doubled by timpani Valhalla ash intervals. Cello's silent octavo trombones join timpani in a harsh penultimate strophe, after which timpani laps into a roll as a second thump pulse in tubas overlaps strings' climactic Hunding iteration. Tubas freeze for a moment with the next downbeat on a double dotted crotchet, then, goaded by trombone's final Valhalla ash interval, bray a double impact and 4 staccato quavers as triplet strings ascend through Rheingold's defiant 6-note spear opposition. This orchestral syntax accompanies Hunding's vocal as he challenges Siegmund to find a weapon for next morning's battle. His initial phrase, a chain of 3 static note iterations, each strophe raised from the previous to follow the curse harmony, through a low ash interval on a second, then a major third, and last second capped in a plunging sixth. After a crotchet rest, his next ejaculation ascends over a broad abandonment triad through a pair of thirds, the first in another low ash interval prepared by reverse air to chord notes, the last lifting from static notes into his D minim, which, along with his following crotchet rest, gives the orchestra climax voice. He hops up a fourth on its terminal up-down beat, strings silent after their staccato quaver chord, brass lingering a dotted crotchet, as he promises the Wälsung will atone those he's killed. Tode, sung to the direst of falling octaves. Supported by cadence and softer dotted crotchet tuba chords, he concludes his threat with a reverse ash interval on a second, capped by a last brutal descending fifth. Only now does Sieglinde hurry to place herself between the two. Atop tremolo violas and horn woodwind chords, unison violins rise in urgent chains of her personal morphine, a variant on Siegmund's guilt over potential doom he may bring her. Syncopations added to ramp up the nervous intensity while emphasizing her Wälsung blood. As there, its initiation on a quasi-ring fragment inversion proceeds through a series of abandonment triads interleaven with reverse melody notes, one of what could be a triad altered with the harmony into first inversion heroic melody notes, a hopeful sign. This distinctive violin line climaxes on a seemingly chance module, new syntax which Holman gives its own musical example and identifies its crucial role in Brünnhilde's Act II championship of the Wälsung twins. While that later evolution awaits the discussion of Act II, its first hint here is a chromatically rising scale, topped by a high ash interval whose terminal plunging sixth is all but an air to seventh, a potent bundle of back-to-back Earth Mother syntax. Hunding barks for his wife to leave the room, her only function to await him in their bedchamber with his Nachttrunk. A strong implication he means to force her sexually. Harsh string chords punctuating quaver rests between each of his 4 a cappella phrases, viola tremolo lingering through the first. From 3 static notes he rises on reverse chord notes into a dotted crotchet, then descends through a Welterb triad on an ugly inverted ash interval. His Nachttrunk bounces up a third into the curse's ringlust, its 4th lift capped by another inverted ash interval and reverse chord notes. This inspires 3 string chords, moving towards cadence to underscore his final order's weight, as he rises a 4th into yet a 3rd inverted ash interval, this one on a cruel tritone. Here he rests a full crotchet quaver as unison strings softly pluck the cadence's 5 root, emphasis for his last words as he tops the cadence, his lascivious threat plunging a 5th. Low strings ratify him brusquely with the resentment scale of his morphine, sparking triple time as Sieglinde obeys, if only by slow degrees, her extended pantomime connected by what seem non-syntactic octavo low string modules. Alone among commentators, Hutchison notes this syntax and, based on stage instructions, describes it as Sieglinde's peremptory gesture and hesitating obedience. The cell plays a role in that evolving monotone Hunding pulse which has already begun to signify not merely the knighting warlord but his tribe as a whole. Of those video productions available to this author, only Chirot's Bicentennial brings knighting supernumeraries on stage during this interlude, and while that production's Hunding shoots a pointed look back at Siegmund, punctuated by this module's strongly graced first note, the mute knightings among him do nothing to associate themselves with the syntax. Other productions are content with transcribing Wagner's stage directions more or less as written in the score, though each tries to enliven those as best they may to give more punch for contemporary audiences. Purists might argue only a strict approach is acceptable, but it seems a missed opportunity not to do more with the Nidings, both here and elsewhere, given their recurring syntax. Over this new module's last measure, first clarinet weaves up a restrained truncation of Sieglinde's prior mute intervention, to descend a sixth into reverse chord notes whose final pitch lingers a semibreve, sign of the maiden's hesitance, followed by another Niding pulse. A second intervention strophe follows, identical but for English horn voicing it more pathetically, an octave above, harmonic arc slightly altered, falling interval a tragic fifth. A third Niding pulse, raised a minor second, fades through a semi-breve crotchet pedal, after which soft woodwinds keen Siegmund's pathetic narrative coda, its fourth bounce shortened to a single descent on that interval, its sensual turn reproduced intact. Static notes and third ascent etching that mildly hopeful low ash interval while still dwelling on the middle third of its abandonment triad, its chord notes expanding through extended reverse melody notes, a hint of the Wälsung's personal syntax. The following dotted quaver rest, a moment of total silence to highlight this syntactic landmark, is interrupted by a slower, gentler Niding pulse, its graced pitch lasting a full measure, while second violins breathe an unharmonized Sieglinde iteration as she moves to prepare Hunding's drink. Stage directions suggesting her meditation has inspired her to drug the potion. The Niding pulse takes up its throb over whose final equally lengthened held note, violins firsts, a third above seconds, restate her morpheme in its wonted form. A renewed Niding pulse holds its final note a semibreve, over which first clarinet atop second clarinet bassoon chords repeats that distinctive first violin syntax from Siegmund's earlier lament over his isolation, its pure ash interval denatured here to a pathetic rising sixth, then elongated by a single love iteration, Sieglinde's affection glimmering through her reticence. A last ungraced Niding throb holds its final note another semibreve, while first oboe English horn keen a more insistent lament iteration, bassoon's harmony joining its last pitch to continue under its love strophe. The heat increases, English horn leaving first oboe's second love pulse to join bassoon harmonization as tremolo violas creep in, second violins added with first oboe's third love strophe, harmony expanding with a thrill, the entire sonic flower building through a major seventh chord in support of first oboe's final love pulse, empathy's struggle towards freedom. This anticipatory climax blossoms into a soft major mode bass trumpet sword iteration, supported by luminous tremolo violin chords, that key morpheme immediately echoed in first oboe's sad minor mode as the tremolo fades. Lacking Donner and Valhalla Part 1, it's Walküre Act 1's only Rheingold syntax audiences consciously recognize, triggering further intimations of the twins' predicament being intimately connected to Wotan's Rheingold impasse. The Meister's stage instruction give it little visual help. Sieglinde deutet mit ihrem Blick andauernd und mit sprechender Bestimmtheit auf eine Stelle am Eschenstamme. In most productions, the weapon is visible in some way, Kupfer's 1992 Bayreuth version giving its plexiglass hilt a glow. Wagner obviously wants Notung's full appearance reserved for the Act 1 climax, but this vague preliminary business is a problem yet to be adequately solved, productions invariably opting for some variant on the stage directions as written. Hunding banishes his wife from the room with an abrupt pair of double impacts, rising by thirds, each anticipated in brash low-string resentment pulses, followed by 4 unison horns' cruel demi-semiquaver graced minim melody notes. A pathetic minor mode English horn sword iteration answers, floated on clarinet bassoon triad, Sieglinde's dispirited exit into the bedchamber. Emphasizing this syntactic reveal with a delicate hint of the sword's ultimate power, first oboe's low ash interval on a fifth caps it exactly as in Wotan's grand Rheingold inspiration. Violins banish the moment, passing their octave pizzicato quaver to violas, cellos across a falling octave during the following 2 downbeats. This crucial reproduction of the sword begs for striking integration of sound and sight, yet the best productions no more than salve its challenges without curing them. With apologies to Wagner, much of the fault lies in believability issues his stage directions create. First among these, Hunding's tardy umbrage at his wife's blatant Siegmund obsession requires the 3 to move and react as if underwater, the approach favored by Kupfer's 1992 Bayreuth version. Charot's 1976 Knighting Warlord fares better, his openly defiant scrutiny a game of chicken with the twins, its downside handicapping his Siegmund and Sieglinde with statuesque behaviors alien to living creatures. Leinhoff's 1989 Munich Knighting broods from his dinner table as if observing a board meeting, not his wife's adultery, while Valentia's brute seems too dense to care, his Wälsung twins equally stolid. More successful in Copenhagen, Holton's Knighting Lord frequently turns his back on the twins' interactions, his final violent outbursts ramping up the tensions with its credible realism. But none of these approaches solve the pantomime's difficulties, which only multiply with Sieglinde's attempt at directing Siegmund to the sword hilt. Hunding is present when Wotan thrusts in the sword, thus wouldn't tolerate his wife lingering over it. Wagner's stage directions finesse this by implying the hilt isn't visible until later when illuminated by the hearth fire's collapse. Yet, eliminating its visual trace during this, the morpheme's first Walküre recurrence, shatters the vital link between action and syntax. Various productions make the hilt visible from the start, which only shifts focus to that problem the Meister's directions seek to avoid, meaning why Siegmund doesn't pull out the sword the moment he's alone with it. Bechtolf's Vienna 2016 solution, one similar to Wagner's, is a Wälsung unable to grasp Sieglinde's gestures, which makes the hero look simple-minded, a weakness suffered by Leinhoff in Munich of 1989, though both send their Hundings off stage during this byplay. In Copenhagen, Sieglinde gestures through open drapes to the ash tree in a garden outside the house, which only trades one obstacle for another, whose Siegmund unaccountably doesn't seize the weapon the moment he sees it. Valentia's sword projection, gracefully revolving in the depths of its stylized tree, provides a kind of visual link, but unsynchronized to the morpheme's 3 iterations, never mind unconnected to Sieglinde's hints. Meantime, apart from Lisieux's glowing pommel and some winsome sword design, no prop yet offered is sufficiently arresting to bear the weight of its text and music, specific instances discussed in their turn. However, thanks to the sword morpheme, most audiences guess the broad outline of Rheingold's final mystery. Siegmund is the cure Warfather has devised for his ring woes, Sieglinde's coming narrative supplying its chronology, the first part of Act 2, its full background. Unable to alert her brother that the very thing he needs lies within his grasp, Sieglinde's failure emphasizes the twins' emotional needs come last in the god's agenda, an echo of his Rheingold neglect for Freya, his family, underlings, and the natural world as a whole. What the sword morpheme really says is that, even in the case of his Wälsung children, and no matter the cost, Wotan means to go on twisting nature's pure energies relentlessly to his own power-laden ends. Having dealt with Sieglinde, the Knighting Lord gathers up his own weapons to lock away in his room, while taunting Siegmund over having none. This begins prior to his vocal, as tubas again develop his personal syntax through a single full pulse followed by 3 additional tail-out iterations, resentment graces in viola's cellos, the whole evolving harmonically. The Knighting Lord joins in the midst of the morpheme's initial tail-out, rising through a low ash interval on a third, followed by a reverse ash interval that descends a tritone to leave the final pulse without vocal. Contrabasses reinforce the answering resentment grace, extended into that dire 6-note Rheingold threat. Hunding joins its final minim, a pitch he repeats as strings plunge in Erda's 7th, which he echoes vocally on the next downbeat. Pizzicato quavers, rising with him as he sketches extended melody notes, moving through a low ash interval, a striking barrier distortion. He caps it vocally with another Erda 7th descent, the phrase as a whole incorporating both chagrin and scheming, along with echoing Loge's Rheingold manipulation. The fire sprite is on the job here at Erda's behest, countering Wotan's interests by means of this seemingly unrelated mortal, the Knighting Lord ordering this Wolfing to meet him next morning in battle. Arco-quaver string chords on first and third beats of the next 2 measures progress through a cadential formula as Hunding completes his challenge with a vocal double impact to lift a 4th into the direst of inverted ash intervals on a falling octave. Then, after a minim rest, a static ash interval followed by a plunging 5th, the Wälsung's fate apparently sealed. A diminished minor 7th minim chord in dark tubas stymies the cadence's expected resolution, which, fading on the chord's tied crotchet, initiates a Hunding pulse on timpani. Low strings answer with the Knighting's resentment scale, followed by timpani throbbing a shortened rhythm pulse. Strings responding with the demi-semiquaver sextuplet descent per Felix mottled score notes, the whole bundle to mimic the lock closing on Hunding's door. Timpani gradually fade away, first on a truncated throb of the tail-out, then 2 static ash intervals. Slower than the first, the last's final crotchet on the next downbeat spurs a diminished minor 7th tuba chord, identical to the prior one, but for extending its pedal a breve semi-breve crotchet. Octavolo strings rise through it on a module eerily like Erda's, its dramatic cap an 11th plunge, leading to a unison semi-breve crotchet. With its release on the next downbeat, timpani resume their pulse to move through a static ash interval and Hunding module, then taper away on crotchets off the beat, and after a minim rest, a last static interval whose conclusion on the next downbeat amounts to a double impact. This launches a meaningful syntactic evolution in what seems an incidental passage, its only purpose to evoke the abandoned Wälsung hemmed in by darkness. Octavolo strings quasi-Erda line, with dark tuba chord concluded on a plunging 7th, resembles the immediately prior syntax with revealing differences. Where before the rising module's pure minor opposed its chord's diminished minor 7th, here it conforms to that harmony. Its first portion, the curse's reverse ring fragment, as sounded twice before to preface Hunding's rites with its 2 overlapping abandonment triads, its ascent finished as heroic melody notes distorted by a tritone. This modular bundle may seem cryptically out of place, yet another example of what Newman brands the Meister's too often sloppy employment of his syntax, but it's hardly that. Though Hunding and his Knightings are almost certainly unaware of Ring, Curse, and the Wälsungs as demigods, their lust for Sieglinde as prize and hatred for Siegmund as enemy prove their racial enmity. The Würger promised in Albrecht's malediction. The young hero may not yet seek the ring, but Wotan intends that he shall, this syntax implying the curse at work on father and son alike. The Earth Mother has no choice but to favor Hunding against the hapless twins, as Wotan's ploy to reclaim the ring, her ongoing program for restoring natural order, growing clearer only as the tale develops. The diving interval, a prescient Erda seventh to balance the heroic note distortion, launches a second trombone semi-breve quaver chord, atop which horns 3 and 4 begin an ominous monotone octavo throb, echo of the horn ostinato lacing Wulfing's indictment. It augments Hunding's initial rhythm with the 3-note strophe from that morpheme's extension, the distinctive pulsation, a compelling suspense device which returns in Act 2 to evoke Hunding and his tribe in pursuit of the Wälsungs. With Siegmund now alone, unarmed and under threat of his life, it stands in for those faceless Nidings hemming him in on all sides. Horns intone a second pulse, joined in its second half by another trombone chord held a semi-breve under which octavo strings growl a third and last Erda distortion, contrabasses alone capping it on a plunging ninth, as trombones shift to a stark diminished minor seventh minim quaver chord. Horns intone another Niding pulse, bass trumpet joining a third strophe with a muted sword iteration, a desolate memory in Siegmund's mind of his father's promise as he's on the verge of revealing it to an audience. Tension building, octavo low strings, 2 semi-breves initiate a scalar climb, horns muttering the next Hunding pulse, violas thrumming a pair of those Valhalla ash intervals associated with the Wälsung hero. Low strings accelerate into chromatic minims across the next pair of measures, second violin tremolos joining viola's septuplet, as it becomes tremolo on the measure's third beat, horns telescoping their throb into a pair of its terminal cells. This stirring crescendo embodies Siegmund's resistance against the tremendous pressure of his unseen mortal captors until he voices what he himself will never know, that he's Wotan's tool for remaking this threatening mortal world in the god's image, both figuratively and literally. Or rather, the syntax reveals it. Floated on strings alone, the Wälsung reproduces Cook's purpose of the sword, introduced by Wotan in Rheingold, bracketed there by the sword's first 2 appearances. This powerful syntactic glue cements the 2 passages, whose subtle differences inject new meaning. Siegmund begins his version rising in Erda fourth, after which he plummets on the same dire falling octave, a cell integral to both sword and curse, his phrased as an inverted ash interval, that module's grimmest incarnation, direst inversion of the pure ash interval. While he also repeats the syntax's third bounce and curse ringlust coda, Siegmund tails out the module's first half with the falling sixth, the Wälsung's more naturally empathetic lyricism mitigating the god's arrogance. The young hero goes on to echo his father's Rheingold barrier, leaving it intact, doubled by strings, just as in Rheingold. Siegmund's unwitting embrace of ideals fated to destroy his love for Sieglinde, underpinned as octave-low strings march down its identical spear cell. These unequivocal syntactic marks exemplify that canker seeded by Wotan, now eating the Wälsung's heart, his father's selfish program for turning the rising octave's natural power against itself to his benefit, reinforced multiple times as the act continues to stretch across the epic until its last pages. The Wälsung concludes with his most radical deviation from the god's original, trading Wotan's reverse melody notes for the Welterb triad of Wälsung sympathy, thus shattering the god turn. Vague intimations until now become clear statements of Wotan's racial quest for world power through his demigod offspring, Welterbe, thanks to the innocent young hero's bloodline. Yet substitution of the triad suggests things may not go as the immortal hopes. That's it for now. My aim is to keep these videos close to a half an hour. This means their number increases while their length does not. The next video picks up where this one leaves off in the midst of Siegmund's desperate need for a weapon, page 63 in Dover's Full Score, second stave. As always, thanks for watching, and please do leave your comments below. Time and energy allowing, I'll do everything I can to respond. Lastly, as all YouTubers know, your subscription to this channel by itself is a huge assist in completing this vast project. Hit the bell to be notified of the next videos. With luck and your support, there's a lot more to come.